Sandra Bullock walked into the luxury boutique quietly. She was wearing simple clothes, a plain shirt, comfortable jeans, and dark glasses that covered most of her face. She did not want anyone to notice her. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. To anyone who did not know her, she looked like an ordinary woman passing by. Sandra loved that feeling sometimes. She wanted to shop like a normal person, without people rushing toward her or asking for autographs. The boutique was known for its expensive brands and rare items. The walls were polished with gold accents. The glass shelves sparkled under bright lights, and the faint smell of expensive perfume floated in the air. Rich customers often came here to show their wealth. For Sandra, it was just another place to look for a dress for an upcoming event. She had come without her assistant or manager, thinking it would be peaceful as she entered. A bell above the glass door made a soft sound. The shop floor was quiet, with only a few shoppers walking around. Sandra moved slowly, touching fabrics, looking at the shine of silk, the cut of long gowns, and the sparkle of diamond accessories. For her, fashion was not only about looks, it was about comfort and simplicity. She smiled softly at a necklace displayed under a spotlight, thinking how nice it would look with a black dress she already had at home. But behind the counter, the boutique manager had already noticed her. The manager was a tall woman in her late 40s, wearing sharp heels and a fitted suit. Her hair was tied tight, and her lips carried a shade of red that seemed to announce her authority. She looked at Sandra from head to toe, then leaned slightly to her side and whispered something to another employee. The two exchanged a small laugh. Not friendly but mocking, Sandra pretended not to notice. She had been in Hollywood long enough to understand how people sometimes judged quickly. She kept walking, her fingers brushing against an elegant blue dress. She turned the tag gently to check the size. Before she could even hold it up properly, the manager walked over, her heels clicking loudly against the marble floor. "Can I help you with something?" the manager asked. Her tone was polite on the surface but filled with hidden sharpness. Sandra smiled politely and said she was just looking. The manager folded her arms and tilted her head slightly. She did not recognize Sandra under the glasses and the plain outfit. To her, Sandra looked like a middle-aged woman who could not possibly afford anything in the store. Sandra nodded and continued walking, but she could feel the woman's eyes following her. Every step she took, every item she touched, was being watched. The boutique, once quiet and peaceful, now felt heavy with tension. She overheard another staff member whisper, "Why is she even here? Look at her clothes." Sandra's heart tightened, but she stayed calm. She had always believed that dignity came from silence. She stopped near a display of handbags, their leather shining under the light. She carefully lifted one, admiring the craftsmanship. The manager stepped closer again, this time standing uncomfortably near. "That bag is very expensive," she said firmly, as if warning Sandra not to damage it. Sandra put the bag down slowly and gave a small nod. Her throat felt dry, but she forced a gentle smile. Two other customers entered the boutique at that moment. Dressed in glittering outfits with shiny jewelry, the manager's attitude changed instantly. She rushed toward them with a wide smile. Offering them champagne, her voice was sweet, her hands moving gracefully as she showed them a new collection. Sandra watched quietly, the contrast striking. The warmth that the manager gave to the wealthy customers was the same warmth she had denied Sandra. Sandra thought about leaving. She had no reason to stay where she was not welcomed. But something inside her told her to wait a little longer. She wanted to see how far this treatment would go. She took a slow breath and walked deeper into the boutique. She could feel some people glancing at her, one or two shoppers already whispering. It was as if the manager's cold behavior had given others permission to judge as well. Sandra's fingers rested on another dress, a silver gown with a soft glow. She thought about how beautiful it would look on a red carpet. Her eyes softened with a small spark of excitement. But before she could imagine more, the sound of the manager's sharp heels came again. The woman was back, her lips tight, her eyes narrowed. She gave Sandra a look that carried both suspicion and disdain. Sandra swallowed the heaviness in her chest and remained quiet. The boutique that should have been a place of beauty now felt like a cage. Every corner seemed to carry whispers. Every mirror seemed to reflect not her image but their judgment. Still, Sandra stood tall. Her silence was her shield. She knew who she was, but for the moment, she was just a woman who wanted to buy a dress, and in that moment, she realized that sometimes fame could not protect you from prejudice. This was only the beginning of what would turn into one of the most unforgettable moments in that boutique's history. A moment that would expose arrogance, reveal truth, and later, shock everyone who had dared to laugh. But for now, Sandra kept her calm, not knowing that someone else was about to walk in and change everything. The manager stood near the counter, still watching Sandra with sharp eyes. She had returned to serving the two wealthy customers, her voice filled with sweetness, her laughter loud and bright. But every now and then she turned her gaze back toward Sandra, as if making sure that Sandra did not touch something she could not afford. The air in the boutique was heavy, the sound of clicking heels and soft whispers echoing across the polished floor. Sandra tried to focus on the dresses. Running her fingers over silk and lace, she wanted to ignore the cold stares. She wanted to pretend she was invisible, but the manager did not let it go. She slowly walked back toward Sandra, her steps deliberate. The sound of her heels tapping like a warning. Sandra looked up politely, trying to smile. The manager's lips curved into something close to a smirk. "That dress," the manager said, pointing at the gown Sandra had been touching, "is part of a private collection. It's not something just anyone can buy." Her words were smooth, but her eyes carried disdain. She tilted her chin upward, looking down at Sandra as though she were out of place. Sandra held her silence. She had heard such tones before, from people who judged without knowing. She placed the dress gently back on the rack and nodded. But the manager was not finished. She stepped closer, lowering her voice but making sure it was loud enough for the nearby staff to hear. "Perhaps you should look at the discount section in the back. The prices there are more manageable." A small laugh escaped her lips. Cold and mocking, Sandra felt her cheeks grow warm. The words cut deep. She was used to being in front of cameras, judged by critics, but this was different. This was not about acting. This was about being dismissed as if she was less than the others in the room. One of the employees standing nearby chuckled softly, trying to hide it behind her hand. The sound echoed in Sandra's ears. She glanced around, seeing a few customers looking curiously in her direction, some with pity, others with the same arrogant look as the manager. Sandra's throat tightened, but she kept her dignity. She straightened her shoulders and whispered, "I'm just browsing, thank you." Her voice was steady, but her heart felt heavy. The manager, however, was not satisfied. She seemed to enjoy pressing harder. "Of course, but you should understand. Our boutique is for a very exclusive clientele. Many of the items here cost more than a year's salary for an average person." She leaned slightly forward, her eyes cold. "Sometimes people step in thinking they can shop here, but it is not always possible." She let the words hang in the air, letting them sting. Sandra stood still, gripping the strap of her small bag tightly. The silence that followed was unbearable. The two wealthy customers who had been treated with so much respect earlier turned their heads. They looked at Sandra, whispering something to each other with amused smiles. One of them raised her eyebrows and laughed quietly. The manager noticed and smiled proudly, as if she had performed well in front of an audience. Sandra looked down at her shoes for a moment, not out of shame but to hold her emotions in place. Sandra thought about leaving then, walking out quietly and never returning, but a part of her told her to stay. She wanted to see just how far the manager's arrogance would go. She moved toward another section, where handbags lined the wall. The manager followed slowly, as if chasing her. Sandra touched a small black leather bag. Simple yet elegant, she admired the detail. But before she could lift it properly, the manager spoke again. "That bag," she said, her tone sharp, "is worth more than you think. I would not recommend touching it unless you are serious about buying." Her voice carried across the boutique. Louder this time, customers turned their heads again. Sandra froze. The embarrassment was now public. The whispers around her grew louder. Someone muttered, "Why is she even here?" Sandra felt her chest tighten. She wanted to disappear, but she stood firm. She put the bag back gently and turned away, walking toward the far corner of the boutique. She thought if she moved away, the manager would stop. But the woman's pride only grew stronger. She whispered something to another employee, and they both laughed. The sound was sharp, cruel, filling the quiet space with humiliation. Sandra kept walking, her face calm but her heart breaking inside. Every movement became harder. Every glance from the staff felt like a judgment. Sandra had walked red carpets with flashing lights. She had faced cameras that caught every flaw, yet never had she felt this kind of loneliness. In this boutique, surrounded by strangers, she was not Sandra Bullock the star. She was just another woman being treated as if she did not belong. The manager finally delivered the words that broke the last piece of silence. She walked closer once more and said firmly, "I think this store is too exclusive for people like you. Maybe you should try somewhere else." Her words echoed in the air, heavy and cruel. Sandra's eyes widened slightly. Her lips parting, the insult was direct. Not hidden behind politeness anymore. It was a slap made of words, sharp enough to make even the other customers gasp. The boutique fell quiet for a moment. The sound of whispers stopped, and every eye turned to Sandra. Some people looked shocked, some amused, and others simply watched with interest. Sandra stood there, her body still. Her silence louder than words. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them who she really was, but she refused. Her dignity was not for sale. Inside, Sandra's heart pounded. She thought of walking away, never looking back, but deep down something told her that this story was not finished yet. Something was about to happen that would change the entire room, and the manager's arrogant smile would soon disappear. The room felt colder after the manager's cruel words. The boutique was filled with light from shining chandeliers, but for Sandra it felt dark. Every corner seemed to hold judgment. Every whisper seemed sharper than before. She stood still for a moment, her chest tight, and then she slowly walked toward another rack of dresses, hoping to hide herself among the fabrics. But there was no escape. The atmosphere had already changed. The other customers who had been minding their own business were now fully aware of what was happening. A young woman near the jewelry counter covered her mouth with her hand and whispered something to her friend. They both glanced at Sandra and shook their heads as if she had no right to be there. An older man in a tailored suit looked at her with raised brows. His face full of arrogance, his eyes seemed to say, "You don't belong here." A couple who were browsing shoes laughed softly, trying to keep their voices low, but the sound carried across the polished floor. Sandra felt each reaction like a weight pressing on her shoulders. She had walked into the store with the hope of peace, of being unnoticed. Now all eyes were on her. But not with kindness, not with recognition. It was the wrong kind of attention, the kind that burned instead of warmed. Still she did not speak. She moved slowly, her fingers brushing against the edge of a golden gown. Her heart told her to walk out the door, but her pride held her in place. She would not run, the employees whispered too. One girl standing near the handbags leaned closer to her colleague. "She looks like she can't even afford a scarf here," she said. Sandra heard it, her ears catching every cruel word. Her throat tightened, she reminded herself to breathe. She thought about the irony. If only they knew, if only they saw past her plain clothes and dark glasses. But that was not who she wanted to be today. She wanted to be just a woman, a normal shopper. But the world around her would not allow it. The manager returned to the wealthy customers, pouring them glasses of champagne from a tray. She smiled widely, her voice now dripping with sweetness. "This new line was designed for our best clients," she said proudly, casting a quick glance toward Sandra as if to emphasize her point. The women laughed, taking sips of champagne. One of them looked Sandra up and down and whispered something that made the other giggle. Sandra caught the sound even if she did not hear the words. The shame pressed deeper into her heart. She moved toward a mirror near the corner. Hoping to avoid more stares, she looked at her reflection, plain and unremarkable in that glamorous place. Her glasses hid most of her face, but she could see the sadness in her eyes. For a moment she thought about removing the glasses, letting them all see who she was, letting the shock silence the laughter, but something inside her told her not to. She should not need fame to demand respect. Respect should be given to any person, no matter who they were. A child in the store pulled at his mother's sleeve, pointing at Sandra. "Mom, why is that lady sad?" he asked. His innocent voice carried further than expected. The mother quickly hushed him and pulled him away, embarrassed. Sandra almost smiled. The child had seen the truth that the adults were too blind to notice. The whispers continued. The sound of judgment filled the boutique like background music, cruel and endless every time Sandra reached for an item. She could feel the weight of eyes on her back. It was not only the manager anymore. It was the whole room, the laughter of strangers, the pity in a few faces, the indifference in others. It created a storm inside her chest, but still, she stayed silent. The manager walked past her again, her perfume strong, her heels clicking like a drumbeat of authority. She gave Sandra a quick glance, a smirk playing at the edge of her lips. It was as if she was proud of turning the entire room against one person. Sandra met her eyes for a second. Calm but firm, she refused to lower her gaze. Even though the sting of humiliation burned within her, moments stretched long. The boutique, with its glittering lights and polished mirrors, no longer felt like a store, it felt like a stage, and Sandra was the unwilling performer. The audience sat in silence, judging, laughing, waiting for her next move. She could hear the faint buzz of a phone camera turning on. Someone was recording quietly from behind a rack. The thought of her humiliation spreading outside these walls made her heart sink. Still, Sandra moved forward with quiet dignity. She touched another dress, lifted it slightly, then placed it back. Each small action was her way of saying she would not break. The silence around her grew heavier. Some customers had stopped shopping entirely, watching her as though she were a scene in a drama. The champagne glasses clinked faintly in the background. Mixing with whispers that stabbed like needles, Sandra thought about leaving again, her body halfway turning toward the exit. But just as she did, she caught sight of the manager's proud smile across the room, the woman's posture, the tilt of her chin, the coldness in her eyes. It was the look of victory, the look of someone who believed they had won. That single sight stopped Sandra from walking out. She would not give her that satisfaction. She stayed, her heart heavy but her pride intact. In that moment, the entire boutique seemed frozen in a cruel balance. Sandra alone against the weight of arrogance and judgment. She did not know that soon the door would open and everything would change. The whispers would turn into gasps, the laughter into silence, and the same people who mocked her would feel the sting of shame. But for now she stood quietly in the storm of eyes, her silence a shield, her dignity her only weapon. The silence in the boutique grew heavier. Sandra stood near the row of gowns, her fingers brushing softly against the edge of the silver fabric. She could feel the tension building around her like a storm that refused to break. The manager, with her sharp heels and sharp tongue, moved closer again, her eyes narrowed with pride. The other customers pretended to be busy, but their ears were waiting, their eyes stealing quick glances. It was like the entire boutique had turned into a stage where Sandra was the target of humiliation. The manager stopped only a few steps away. She folded her arms, tilted her head, and gave Sandra a cold smile. It was not the smile of kindness. It was the smile of someone ready to wound. Her voice cut through the quiet air, louder than before. "I think this store is too exclusive for people like you," she said. Each word was slow, sharp, and clear. She wanted everyone in the room to hear it. The sound of her words echoed in Sandra's ears. The air inside her chest seemed to disappear for a moment. She had been judged many times in her life, but this insult was different. It was not about her work, not about her acting. It was about her as a person. She stood still, her lips parting slightly, her eyes wide. The insult was like a slap that left no mark on her skin but left a deep bruise on her heart. Gasps rose quietly from the corners of the room. A woman near the jewelry counter covered her mouth, unable to believe the words spoken out loud. The wealthy customers who had been sipping champagne paused, their glasses frozen halfway. Some looked shocked. Others smirked as if enjoying the scene. A young man near the shoes whispered, "Did she really just say that?" And his companion nodded with wide eyes. The boutique, once filled with the polite hum of shopping, was now charged with electricity. Sandra's throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. Her hands held the strap of her small bag tightly. Her instinct told her to leave, to walk out and escape the eyes that were burning into her. But another voice inside her whispered to stand tall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Her silence became her shield. Her dignity became her answer. The manager waited, expecting Sandra to react, expecting her to argue, but Sandra did not speak. She simply looked back at the woman, her calm face hiding the storm inside her. That silence was powerful, but the manager did not see it. Instead, she mistook it for weakness. Her smirk grew wider, her chin lifted higher. She turned slightly to glance at the other customers, as if showing them her power, as if telling them she had put someone in her place. A few customers shifted uncomfortably. They knew the line had been crossed. Some even looked away, ashamed to be witnesses, but no one stepped forward. No one defended the woman standing alone in moments like this. Silence from the crowd can hurt as much as the insult itself. Sandra could feel the weight of their quiet judgment pressing on her shoulders. Inside Sandra's heart, a mixture of emotions swirled. Hurt, anger, sadness, and disbelief all fought for space. She thought about how strange life was, how she could be praised by millions for her work on screen, yet still be treated as nothing by one arrogant stranger in a boutique. It reminded her that fame did not always protect from cruelty. Sometimes it made the sting sharper because people assumed she was above pain. But she was not. She was human. One of the employees near the counter coughed softly, trying to break the thick silence. Another looked down at the floor, embarrassed. The wealthy customers exchanged looks, some amused, some entertained. As though they were watching a play, Sandra noticed it all. Every whisper, every glance, every hidden smile. It was the longest minute she had felt in years. The insult did more than hurt Sandra. It exposed the heart of the manager. It revealed her arrogance, her pride, her cruelty. The words were not only heard by Sandra, but by everyone in the room. And in that moment, the boutique was divided. Some silently agreed with the manager, some were ashamed, and some were simply waiting to see what would happen next. Sandra straightened her back. Her silence remained, but her eyes carried strength. She looked at the manager with calm dignity, showing that she would not lower herself to respond with anger. That look unsettled the manager for a brief second, but she quickly masked it with another fake smile. She turned back to the wealthy customers, trying to act as though nothing had happened. But the air had changed. The tension remained. The whispers started again, softer this time. Customers spoke to each other in hushed voices. Some shook their heads. Others pointed discreetly toward Sandra. Everyone was waiting. Everyone knew something bigger was about to happen. It felt like the story was unfinished, like the moment could not end here. Sandra took a slow breath. Her heart was heavy, but she knew she could not let the insult define her. She turned slightly toward the dresses, pretending to look again, even though her mind was far away. She wanted to hold her ground, to stay composed. The silence she carried was her power, but deep inside she longed for someone, anyone, to step in and show that kindness still existed in that cold room. None of the customers moved. None of the employees spoke. The manager continued to glow in her own pride. She believed she had won. She believed she had pushed Sandra out. But she did not know that fate was preparing a twist. The boutique's glass door would soon open, and with it, a man would walk in, who would turn the entire scene upside down. The words that had wounded Sandra would soon become the very reason the arrogant manager would face her own humiliation. Sandra stood quietly, unaware of what was coming. The storm had already begun, but the lightning strike that would change everything was still moments away. The air inside the boutique was heavy. Sandra stood quietly, her dignity holding her together even after the cruel insult. The manager had turned her back, pretending to be busy with the wealthy customers. The staff whispered to each other, some stealing glances at Sandra. The atmosphere was thick with judgment and tension. Sandra thought of leaving, her feet shifting slightly toward the glass door. But before she could decide, the sound of the door opening filled the room. A bell rang softly above it, announcing a new arrival. Everyone's eyes turned toward the entrance. A tall figure stepped in. His presence was calm yet powerful. He wore simple clothes, a dark jacket, jeans, and boots, his hair slightly messy, his face carrying that familiar quiet strength. It was Keanu Reeves the moment he entered. The energy of the boutique shifted. Some customers gasped quietly. Recognizing him immediately, others straightened up, suddenly aware that someone important had arrived. Sandra lifted her head slowly. Her heart skipped for a second. She knew that walk, that quiet presence. She had worked with him, laughed with him, shared moments of kindness that few people ever got to see. And now here he was, standing in the doorway of the boutique, looking around with those thoughtful eyes for the first time since entering the store. Sandra felt a flicker of comfort. The manager's face lit up instantly. Her eyes widened and she rushed toward the door. Her heels clicked quickly across the floor. Her fake smile stretched wider than before. She raised her hand slightly, almost as if welcoming a king. "Welcome, Mr. Reeves," she said in a voice dripping with honey, her earlier harshness completely gone. Her tone was soft, respectful, desperate to please. She did not hesitate to show her best self for him. Keanu gave her a polite nod but did not smile. His eyes scanned the boutique and he noticed the stillness in the room. The way customers were not shopping but watching. The whispers that lingered in the air. His gaze moved across the racks and then he saw her, Sandra, standing quietly near the dresses. Her face calm but her eyes carrying the weight of pain. In that instant he understood. He had seen enough of the world to recognize when something was wrong. The shift in energy, the uncomfortable silence, the way Sandra stood alone while others watched. It told him everything. He did not need to ask many questions. His heart told him the truth. The manager tried to block his view. "We have a new collection just for our elite clients. I'd be happy to show you," she said quickly, her voice almost trembling with eagerness. She wanted to pull his attention away to distract him, but Keanu did not let her control the moment. He stepped past her, his step steady. His eyes locked on Sandra. The entire boutique froze. The wealthy customers stopped mid-sip of their champagne. The employees held their breath. Even the manager froze for a moment. Watching him walk past her without care, Sandra looked up fully now and their eyes met. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. Her face softened, and for the first time that day, the corners of her mouth curved into a small, fragile smile. Keanu walked directly to her. His voice was calm, deep, and warm. "Sandra," he said. His tone carried respect and familiarity. The sound of her name from his lips filled the boutique like a spark. Everyone realized in that moment who she was. The whispers stopped completely. The wealthy women who had laughed before lowered their glasses slowly. A young man near the shoes dropped his jaw in disbelief. Sandra felt a rush of relief and emotion. She did not need saving, but his presence reminded her that she was not alone, that someone truly saw her for who she was. She whispered back softly, "Keanu." Her voice carried warmth, though her heart was still heavy with what had happened. The manager's face drained of color. Her confident smile vanished. Her eyes darted between Sandra and Keanu. Her mind raced. She realized too late who the woman she had shamed actually was. Her hands fidgeted, her lips trembled. The confidence she had shown moments ago cracked like thin glass. The boutique was silent now. Everyone watched the two of them. The humiliation that Sandra had suffered only moments earlier was now turning into something else. The crowd that had laughed or whispered before stood frozen, their faces red with shame or shock, and the manager, the one who had led the cruelty, now stood pale, her authority shattered in a single moment. Keanu's calm eyes shifted briefly to the manager. He did not speak yet, but the look alone was enough to send a wave of fear through her. She felt exposed, caught in her own arrogance. She tried to force a smile again, stammering softly, I didn't realize," but her voice failed her. Sandra lowered her head slightly, trying to gather herself. The pain she felt from the insults was still fresh, but now it mixed with relief. Keanu's arrival was like a quiet storm, changing everything without a single raised voice. Without him saying much, the truth was already revealed. The customers who had mocked Sandra earlier now avoided her eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably, wishing they could disappear. Others whispered apologies under their breath that she could not hear. The employees who had laughed stood stiff, regret written across their faces. Sandra took a small breath, her shoulders easing slightly. She felt seen, truly seen, and she knew this moment was only the beginning. The real confrontation had yet to come. Keanu was here, and his calm presence would soon turn into action. The same room that had judged Sandra so cruelly would soon witness justice in a way they never expected. For now, the boutique held its breath. A famous actress had been shamed, a kind man had arrived, and everyone knew the story was about to take a turn that none of them would forget. The boutique was silent. Everyone stood frozen, watching Keanu walk toward Sandra. The sound of his steps was the only thing breaking the tension. Sandra stood tall, but her eyes showed relief. His presence gave her strength. The manager, who only moments ago had spoken with arrogance, now looked uneasy, her face pale, her smile weak. She realized her mistake, but it was too late. Keanu stopped beside Sandra. His calm eyes met hers, and then he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sandra," he said softly. His voice was filled with warmth and respect. The room seemed to breathe again. Customers gasped quietly, realizing with certainty that the woman they had seen mocked and humiliated was none other than Sandra Bullock. The shock spread quickly. People who had laughed earlier now stared at the floor, ashamed of themselves. The wealthy women who had giggled into their champagne were stiff, their hands trembling as they put their glasses down. Employees shifted nervously, some hid behind racks. Others looked at each other with wide eyes. The room that had once judged Sandra was now heavy with regret. Keanu looked at her for a long moment before turning his gaze toward the manager. His face was calm, but his eyes were firm. The manager tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't realize she was—" But Keanu raised a hand slightly. Stopping her mid-sentence, he did not need to raise his voice. His quiet presence was enough to silence the entire boutique. "Why was she treated like this?" Keanu asked. His voice was steady, not angry, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that made people listen. He glanced around the boutique, letting his words hang in the air. Why was Sandra made to feel unwelcome here? No one answered. The staff looked down. The customers stayed quiet. The manager swallowed hard, trying to find words. It was a misunderstanding, she stammered. Her voice lacked the confidence it carried earlier. "I thought she was—" She stopped, realizing that anything she said would only expose her arrogance. Keanu stepped a little closer, his tone still calm but sharper now. "You thought she was less," he said. "You thought her worth came from what she wore, from what you assumed she could buy." His words cut deeper than anger, because they were the truth spoken plainly. The manager's lips trembled. She could not look him in the eyes. Sandra stood quietly beside him, her silence still powerful, her dignity unbroken. The room watched, holding its breath. Keanu continued, "You don't judge someone's worth by their clothes, or their money, or what you think they can afford. Every person deserves respect." His voice was calm, but his words were like a lesson carved into stone. The crowd began to murmur. Some nodded slowly. Realizing the truth of his words, others looked ashamed, remembering their own whispers and laughter. The wealthy women who had mocked Sandra earlier now shifted uncomfortably. One of them set her champagne glass down with shaking hands, her face red. The employees looked pale, knowing their behavior had been seen too. The manager tried once more, her voice weak. "I didn't mean—" But Keanu interrupted gently. "Yes, you did. You meant every word. You wanted to humiliate her. And you enjoyed it." His voice was not cruel, but it was honest. The honesty burned hotter than any anger. The manager lowered her eyes. Her pride shattered. Sandra finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Keanu, it's fine," she whispered. But Keanu shook his head gently. "No, it's not fine," he said firmly. "You don't deserve this." "No one does." His hand remained on her shoulder, steadying her, reminding her she was not alone. The boutique was still silent. Every person inside knew they had witnessed something important. Something more than a celebrity moment. It was a lesson in humanity. Keanu's calm defense was more powerful than shouting. His words carried respect, dignity, and truth. The employees who had laughed earlier now looked guilty. One young woman near the handbags wiped at her eyes. Ashamed of herself, a man near the shoes muttered quietly, "She was right here and we all just watched." His voice carried guilt. The wealthy customers said nothing. Their earlier arrogance gone, the manager stood frozen. Her once proud posture now broken. She looked smaller, her shoulders hunched. She knew she had lost everything in that moment, not just respect but her own confidence. Keanu's words had exposed her in front of everyone, and there was no escape. Sandra looked at the faces around her. She could see the change. The same people who had judged her minutes ago were now avoiding her eyes. Ashamed, she took a deep breath. Her dignity was intact, but her heart still ached. She gave Keanu a small smile, gratitude shining through her eyes. Keanu turned back to her, speaking gently now. "You don't have to stay here," he said. "Let's go. You don't need their approval. You've already proven who you are." His words wrapped around her like a shield, strong and comforting. Sandra nodded softly. But before they could leave, Keanu turned once more toward the manager, his eyes steady. "Remember this," he said. "Respect is not a luxury you hand out to people you think deserve it. Respect is the basic price of being human. If you cannot give that, then you don't belong in this job." The words hung in the air like thunder. The boutique was silent again. No one dared move. The lesson was clear. The arrogance of the manager had been crushed. The cruelty of the whispers had been exposed. Keanu then guided Sandra gently toward the exit, his hand still steady on her shoulder. The crowd parted quietly. No one dared to laugh now. No one dared to whisper. They only watched, their shame heavy in the silence. Sandra walked with dignity, her steps calm, her silence more powerful than anything she could have said. Keanu's presence beside her was enough to turn humiliation into strength. And though the pain of those words would not vanish easily, this moment had given her back what the manager had tried to take, her worth. The boutique door opened again. The bell rang softly as they stepped out, leaving behind a room full of silence, shame, and faces that would never forget what they had just witnessed. The room stayed frozen after Keanu's calm but sharp words. No one dared to move. The sound of the chandeliers buzzing above was the only noise. Sandra stood quietly beside him, her heart still heavy but calmer now. She looked at the faces around her, the customers who had whispered, the staff who had laughed, and the manager who now looked pale and small. It was as if the world inside that boutique had turned upside down in just a few minutes. Keanu's eyes swept across the room slowly. He was not shouting, he was not angry, yet his presence filled every corner. Every person there felt as if he were speaking directly to them. "All of you saw what happened," he said. His voice was low but carried clearly. "You heard the words, you saw the way she was treated, and most of you stayed silent." A heavy silence followed his words. Customers shifted uncomfortably. One woman near the jewelry section looked down at the floor. Clutching her bag tightly, a man near the shoe racks cleared his throat nervously. Another customer whispered, "He's right." But no one else spoke. The guilt spread like a shadow across the room. Keanu continued, "It wasn't just the manager. It was the silence that allowed her words to grow louder. It was the whispers that made her cruelty heavier. Respect isn't only about what you say. It's also about what you allow to happen." His voice was calm, but it carried weight. People's faces turned red, some looked away, some closed their eyes as if trying to hide from their own shame. The manager tried to interrupt, her voice weak. "Mr. Reeves, please. It was only a mistake." But Keanu looked at her directly. "No, it was a choice," he said firmly. "You chose to treat someone with arrogance because of how she looked. You chose to insult her because you thought no one would care. And worse, you enjoyed it, you smiled when others laughed. You let your pride become cruelty." His words struck like arrows, sharp but true. The manager's lips trembled. She had no answer. Sandra stood still, listening. Her heart swelled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. She had felt so alone just minutes ago. But now Keanu's words were like a shield around her. He was not only defending her, he was teaching everyone a lesson. She watched the faces in the room change, the arrogance melting into shame, the whispers into silence. Keanu's gaze moved back to the customers. "Do you know who she is?" he asked softly. "Yes, she's Sandra Bullock, but that's not the point." "The point is, even if she wasn't, even if she were just a woman walking in from the street, she deserves respect, she deserves kindness. The way you treat people when you think they're nobody shows who you truly are." A young woman near the handbags lowered her head, her eyes wet with regret. She had laughed earlier. Now her cheeks burned. An older man who had smirked before sighed deeply, unable to meet Sandra's eyes. The wealthy customers who had enjoyed the show now looked trapped in their own guilt. One of them whispered to her friend, "I feel sick." The room was heavy with shame. But Keanu did not stop. He spoke with the same calmness. "Fame and money do not make a person worthy, humanity does, and if you cannot see that, then you've already lost something greater than wealth. You've lost your decency." His words filled the boutique like thunder without sound. They echoed in the hearts of everyone who had stood silent. The manager's leg shook slightly. She looked smaller now, her posture broken. She tried to hide her face, but the truth was already out. Her pride, her authority, everything she thought made her powerful, was stripped away in front of everyone. Her silence now was filled with fear. Sandra finally spoke, her voice soft. "Keanu," she whispered, "it's enough." But Keanu shook his head gently. "No, Sandra, they need to hear it." He turned back to the room, his expression calm but firm. "This is more than one mistake. It's about all of us, how we treat strangers, how we treat the people we think are unimportant. If you can't show respect here, in a boutique filled with wealth, then what hope is there outside? In the real world where people struggle every day." Some customers nodded slowly, understanding. Others shifted, their shame too heavy. The employees looked down, one of them biting her lip to hold back tears. The boutique that had once been filled with laughter and arrogance was now a place of quiet reflection. Keanu then looked back at Sandra, his eyes gentle. "You don't deserve this. You never did," he said softly. His words made her eyes glisten. She felt the warmth of his kindness, the honesty of his heart. For a moment, the pain inside her eased, replaced by the comfort of being truly seen. The crowd remained silent. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. The wealthy women who had laughed now avoided Sandra's gaze. The man near the shoes shifted his weight, clearly wishing he could disappear. The employees trembled, knowing they had witnessed their leader's fall. The lesson was clear. Keanu had not raised his voice, he had not shouted, but his words carried more force than any anger could. He had turned the boutique into a mirror, showing everyone the truth of their actions, showing them the ugliness of arrogance and the beauty of respect. Sandra stood by his side, strong once again. Her silence was no longer heavy with pain. It was now filled with dignity. She looked at the manager one last time, and then at the customers. Her calm gaze said more than words. It said that she would not be broken, that she was above their judgment. Keanu's hand remained on her shoulder, steady and warm. Together they stood in the middle of the boutique, a symbol of kindness and strength against cruelty and arrogance, and everyone there knew they would never forget this moment. The boutique was still and silent. Sandra stood tall beside Keanu, her calm eyes looking around the room. The people who had laughed now avoided her gaze, their faces red with shame. The staff who had whispered about her earlier kept their heads low, not daring to move, and the manager, who had once smiled with arrogance, now looked broken, her pride shattered into pieces. Keanu turned to Sandra gently, his voice warm and steady. "Let's go," he said softly. His words carried kindness. Not just for her, but for everyone watching. He was showing them that dignity was not found in insults or money, but in how you treated others. He stepped slightly ahead, his hand brushing her shoulder as if guiding her. Sandra nodded quietly, her heart still heavy but also lighter now. She was not alone anymore. Before leaving, Keanu paused. He looked back at the manager and the staff. His calm eyes held them in place. "Remember this moment," he said. His voice was quiet but filled with strength. "Respect is free, it costs you nothing, but if you withhold it, the cost can be everything." The words fell like stones in the silence. Every person in the boutique felt them deeply. Sandra adjusted her small bag and walked with him toward the exit. Her steps were slow but graceful. She carried herself with dignity. Her silence said more than anger ever could. The customers moved aside, clearing a path for her. Some of them lowered their heads, some whispered softly, but none dared to mock her again. The wealthy women who had laughed earlier now sat frozen with guilt, their glasses of champagne untouched. One of them bit her lip, her eyes wet. She realized how cruel she had been. The man near the shoe racks, who had smirked before, now looked pale and uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, ashamed of the part he had played in the humiliation. The staff stood near the counter, their faces pale. The young woman who had once whispered cruelly about Sandra now clutched her hands together, wishing she could take her words back. The others exchanged guilty glances, unable to forget what they had done. The boutique that had once been filled with light, laughter, and pride was now filled with regret and silence. Sandra and Keanu reached the door. The bell above it chimed softly as Keanu pushed it open. The sound broke the silence like a final note in a song. Before stepping outside, Sandra turned her head slightly. She looked at the room one last time. Her gaze was calm, steady. It was not a look of anger. It was a look that carried strength, forgiveness, and dignity. It told everyone there that she was not broken, that their cruelty had failed. The manager's face turned pale under that gaze. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Her hands trembled, her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to undo what had been done, but no words came. Sandra's silence was louder than anything she could say. Sandra stepped out into the sunlight with Keanu. The warm air outside felt different, freeing. She took a deep breath, her chest rising. For the first time since walking into that boutique, she felt relief. Keanu stayed close, his calm presence a comfort. He gave her a small smile and she returned it, a smile filled with gratitude. Inside the boutique, the silence remained heavy. Customers looked at each other with guilt. Some began to whisper apologies to themselves. Others shook their heads, regretting their silence. The wealthy women who had mocked Sandra earlier could not even look at each other. Their arrogance had turned into shame. The employees stood frozen, knowing the truth of their cruelty had been exposed. The manager finally sat down on a chair near the counter, her face pale and her body weak. Her pride was gone. She understood that her words would haunt her. The day she tried to humiliate someone had become the day she humiliated herself. She knew the memory of Keanu's calm words and Sandra's dignity would never leave her. Outside, Sandra and Keanu walked together down the street. People passing by turned their heads. Some recognized them, smiling and whispering in awe. Sandra lowered her glasses again, this time not to hide but to feel free. Keanu walked beside her, quiet but protective. His presence was enough. Sandra thought about what had happened. The pain of the insult was still fresh, but she also realized something important. She had been tested, humiliated in front of strangers, but she had not broken. Her silence and dignity had carried her through, and Keanu's arrival had turned shame into strength. The moment had shown her and everyone else the power of kindness and respect. Back inside the boutique, the lesson lingered. The staff whispered to each other, their voices soft with regret. The customers left slowly, each carrying their own guilt. None of them would forget the look in Sandra's eyes or the calm voice of Keanu Reeves. The boutique, once proud and full of luxury, was now a place of quiet reflection. Sandra and Keanu disappeared into the crowd outside, but the memory of what had happened inside that boutique stayed. It would spread through whispers, through stories, through the people who had seen it with their own eyes. They would tell others about the day the manager shamed Sandra Bullock, and Keanu Reeves walked in and changed everything. For Sandra, it was not about revenge, it was about dignity. For Keanu, it was not about showing power, it was about showing truth. And for everyone who had witnessed it, it was a reminder that kindness was the greatest wealth a person could ever have.